Hello students, let us start our next session on the budget and the fiscal policy. And here we are not going to just analyze the budget, we are going to analyze several broader themes along with the budget. Our objective will be to check in which direction this budget is taking the country to, and in what sense is it going towards fiscal consolidation, tax incentives? How is it promoting investments in the country? How is it trying to bring stability to the economy? So this is what we do look for when we check out the fiscal policy. So it will be a discussion on both the budget and the fiscal policy. So let us start this discussion. So first of all, although not very important, but it is still useful to know how the budget is prepared, because then you will be able to understand what procedure government is going through and what does it really mean. So first of all, most of you would know, but still those who have not yet noticed, budget is a forecast for the coming financial year. This budget is for the year 2022-23. Means it will be applicable from April 1st, 2022 to 31st of March 2023. And everything that is there in the budget is a forecast. Forecast means it is a future projection, that how much we expect to earn through taxes, how much we expect to earn through other means, and what am I planning to spend in that year, how I am going to spend this in different ministries, and likewise. And similarly, how much borrowing would be required in order to finance this budget. So these are the different aspects through which we prepare the budget. And entire thing is an estimate, is a forecast. So if you would have looked at budget data, then you must have seen that with the data in the budget, there is something written in the bracket. Sometimes it is written as BE, budgetary estimates. Sometimes it is written as AE, advanced estimates. And then sometimes it is written as actuals. So the past data or the past budgets whose data has been verified and has been looked into, there we can talk about the actual numbers. The last year's budget. For that budget, we can talk about certain advanced estimates today. Okay? And the upcoming budget will always be a projection. So that is how we proceed with the budgets. Now, how do we prepare? First of all, we do data collection in different departments, different ministries, and also through the general data collection in the economy, and we look at what rate the economic growth will be there. So first of all, we analyze how much numbers are coming with different ministries, finance ministry, ministry of commerce, etc., that how much taxes we are getting, how much economic growth is happening, how much economic activity is happening. On that basis, and some of the expectation that is then prepared by looking at the international events, we prepare an estimate for the next year, that this is our projection of the growth in the coming year. Then on the basis of the economic growth, we analyze, okay, if my growth is 7%, 8%, and I expect my GDP to reach a certain level, then at that level, how much taxes should be there? So on that basis, we prepare tax estimation. Once we have our tax estimation, then we also prepare a expenditure estimate. For that, we collect data from different ministries. How much was their allocation? How much are they spending? What would be their need for the future? Are they launching any special programs? All such data are collected, and on that basis, we allocate the resources to different ministries. And that is how we prepare our expenditure. While preparing expenditure, we keep one thing in mind, that how much will be my revenues. On that basis only I can spend. So You always decide how much you are going to spend on the basis of your income. If your income is good, you go to travel, you stay in good hotel. But if your income is not good, if you go to travel, you will stay in a budget hotel. Likewise, government will also look for financing big, large project if it has good revenue, and it will have to juggle between projects if it doesn't have that much good revenue. So similarly, government also work. And while preparing for budget, it also looks at the gap, that this is my revenue projection, this is my expenditure projection, and the gap between them, then it prepares a plan to finance it. And that is called deficit financing, that this much gap will be there between my earning and my expenditure, from where I'm going to cover this gap. And that is deficit financing. Largely this is borrowing. So there is certain borrowing we plan within the budget. Okay. In the budget itself, certain borrowing is planned. Then as the year is going on, मान लीजिए हमने बजट तो पास कर दिया है 2022-23 के लिए, इसमें हमने कुछ बोरोविंग शो कर दी है. So we have already projected certain borrowings here. But as we proceed in the year, we do not know what is going to happen exactly. There may be certain unforeseen circumstances. Maybe tax income that we projected will not be there. हमने जो सोचा था टैक्स अर्निंग होगी, उतनी टैक्स अर्निंग नहीं होती है, या कुछ भी XYZ, कोई नेचुरल डिजास्टर है जहां हमें ज़्यादा स्पेंड करना पड़ता है, वी हैव टू स्पेंड मोर ऑन ए नेचुरल डिजास्टर, देन अल्टीमेटली थिंग्स कैन change a lot from our budgetary estimates, and as a result government may have to borrow additionally, and that borrowing usually happens through treasury bills. Treasury bills are there to cover up the mismatch during a financial year, during the budget. Whereas when we provision for the debt while preparing the budget, that debt is financed through the long-term government bonds, which we called as dated securities officially in our budget. So government borrowing is largely from two sources. These two sources are the dated securities, which we also call as government bonds. Then another source of borrowing is treasury bill. Treasury bill is basically a short-term borrowing instrument which is meant for the stopgap arrangement, which is meant for the mismanagement, not mismanagement, but mismatch is a better word, the short-term mismatch between the revenue and the expenditure. So there is a fundamental difference between these two, dated securities and treasury bills. And that is how we go ahead with our budget. Okay, so as I have discussed, a forecast is prepared, okay, data is collected, then we look at the current revenue collection and we prepare revenue forecast, and then we look at the requirement estimates, how much different ministry require, then we prepare expenditure plan, and then ultimately we provision for deficit. So that is how we prepare the budget. Why do we study budget? All of us, those who are watching this video, I expect most of you are students preparing for UPSC Civil Services examination, and this examination requires a specific approach. Unfortunately, most of us look at media, we look at print media, digital media, television, etc. in order to get information on the budget itself. Their perspective is very different. They look at budget from personal finance point of view. They look at budget from tax point of view. They look at budget from politics or election point of view. Who has been able to convince the voters more? Is this budget people friendly or not? But here we do not require any such analysis. जब हमें बजट पढ़ना है तो हमें उसमें से specifically कुछ part पढ़ना है. Okay, so I will discuss this specifically. How much data do we need to read? How much data do we need to remember? And what exactly is useful for us? Okay, so for us, what is required is which direction this budget will take us in future. What exact direction is this budget giving us? Is it planning to increase the deficits permanently? Is it planning to consolidate the budget? means it is trying to cut the wasteful expenditure, it is aiming stability, or are we planning for a lot of tax incentives in order to encourage the economic growth? So that we have to see. Okay, so is it addressing the most pressing concerns of the country? If it is, then we need to focus on them. Okay, whether this budget maintains a balance between the stability and growth, is it so? Or is it look at stability specifically or growth specifically? That we need to find out. Then, is there any landmark scheme or a major flagship program launched with it? This is also important. Have we launched any landmark scheme, a very special scheme on which government will focus a lot in the coming time? There are certain landmark schemes. Landmark schemes, for example, during the UPA period, MNREGS was their flagship program. They would always talk about it. Okay, and that was one of their poll promises to the public as well. So for this government, let us say Make in India is their flagship program. For example, Jandan Yojana is their flagship program. For example, Ujjwala Yojana is their flagship program. So there are various programs which are flagship and some programs which are not considered flagship. Okay, so we have to identify, is there any such big policy launched in it or not? And another thing, you do not ever have to remember the budgetary numbers कि कितने लाख करोड़ का बजट है, कितना किस मिनिस्ट्री को हमने बजट एलोकेट किया, how much budget we have allocated to a different ministry, and the different numbers you do not have to crunch them, you do not have to remember them. आपको ज़्यादा डेटा नहीं याद रखना है. जितना डेटा हम इस डिस्कशन में आज करने वाले हैं वो भी ज़रूरत से ज़्यादा है. Even that is more than enough for you. Okay, so our objective is very, very different in this when we are looking at the budget. Then, okay, we understand that we need to budget in a very different way. But how do we read it? If I have a copy of budget, how do I study that copy? Let us look at it. So first of all, I am supposed to look at the breakup of the revenue projection, that from where the money is coming, how much money is coming from taxation, how much money is coming from non-debt capital receipts, means by selling our companies, by disinvestments of public sector units. Similarly, how much money is coming from non-tax revenue such as court fee and fines, etc. So that is also there. So that is my revenue breakup that I need to look at, from where we are getting the money. Okay, you do not have to remember the numbers, you just have to look at the broader idea that what portion is coming from tax. Just look at this much. What portion is coming from borrowing? These are very important number for us. Then you look at the breakup of expenditure. Again, you need to just look at the trends, not the numbers. Which area are we spending more from past few budgets? Okay, then there are certain priority sectors, certain social sectors, agriculture, these are always priority. So that we also need to look at. Then we need to look at infrastructure, capital expenditure. So we need to identify these specific data. So always look out for the breakup of the expenditure data. Then how much is the capital expenditure? That is always very important because capital expenditure leads to the growth and development. Again, as I've mentioned on the previous slide as well, is there any landmark scheme? This is also important because sometimes direct questions on schemes have been asked in our examination, and not on any scheme. Usually when such questions are asked, they are on the landmark schemes, the major schemes which are discussed a lot, which are analyzed a lot. So that is why. Then we also need to identify the fiscal policy cue from the budget. What is the fiscal policy stance of the budget? How do we identify the fiscal policy stance? Is there fiscal consolidation? Are we trying to control the deficit or are we increasing the deficit? This is very important. Okay, whether our debt is increasing or decreasing, this is also very important. Okay, and again, I've mentioned this already because These two slides, although they are different, but they're very much interrelated. So this discussion is already covered when I was talking about the previous slide. So is there any increase in the tax incentive to encourage the growth or not? So this is what tells us about the fiscal policy outcomes of the budget. Before I move ahead, let us have few words on the fiscal policy. What is fiscal policy? What is monetary policy? Just 2 minutes on this. फिस्कल पॉलिसी और मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी दोनों के ऑब्जेक्टिव्स कॉमन हैं. बोथ फिस्कल पॉलिसी, मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी हैव कॉमन ऑब्जेक्टिव्स. दे try to bring a balance between the growth and the stability. Sometimes the focus on growth is more and stability is less. And sometimes it is other way around. Sometimes focus is more on stability and less on growth. How do they achieve this? So in fiscal policy, if we want to create more growth, for higher growth, we need to increase the investments. And investments will increase if there is more demand in the economy and if interest rates are less. Plus, if there are tax incentives for the companies. All of this encourage investments. So tax incentives comes under fiscal policy. So government can provide tax incentives, government can provide subsidies in order to encourage a business. Okay, this is fairly understood. In order to encourage new business, government from time to time introduce tax benefits. Sometimes it is not just for new businesses, even for traditional businesses we introduce some subsidies. So tax incentives, subsidies, these are the most important fiscal policy tool. Then what are the other tools? How do we achieve these targets? So another thing I said, on which the growth depends is demand. If demand is more, then more people will be encouraged to open more factories. Because if demand is more, people will understand then that we can increase supply in future. If future में supply बढ़ाने का कोई benefit है. If demand is more, then prices will rise. If prices will rise, we want to increase the supply. And when we want to increase the supply, we have to invest first of all. बिना इन्वेस्टमेंट के हम सप्लाई नहीं बढ़ा सकते. अगर मुझे सप्लाई बढ़ानी है अपने प्रोडक्ट की, फॉर एग्जांपल आई एम सेलिंग लेट अस से 2 व्हीलर्स एंड फ्रॉम पास्ट 2 years आई एम विटनेसिंग 20% growth in my sales, and I've realized that this year itself my factory is struggling to meet the requirement. My production has already reached its peak and now I have to open new factory if demand is going to increase more. So if demand continuously rises, then people like me who are supplying different products, they will be encouraged to increase their supply. And in order to increase the supply, they have to open more factories, and this process is basically our investment. So investment will increase if there is more demand, plus if interest rates are less. So in order to encourage less interest rate, or in order to affect the interest rate, it is monetary policy which is used. So we use monetary policy to cut the interest rates. Similarly, we use tax policy to give incentives to the businesses. Similarly, we can use expenditure policy to enhance demand in the economy. So that is how a mixture of both monetary and fiscal policy work together in order to achieve growth. And same goes for stability. What do we mean by stability? Stability means that your macroeconomic indicators like inflation, fiscal deficit, they are in control. So in order to control fiscal deficit, we have to cut our expenditure. We have to increase taxes. That is what we can do through fiscal policy. Similarly, in monetary policy, we can cut down the money supply. That will also control the inflation and also fiscal deficit indirectly to certain extent. So this is the role and the usage of different policies, monetary and fiscal policy. So we have understood through fiscal policy we can increase or increase taxes. This has impact on businesses. We can give more grants to companies. We can give more subsidies to companies. This is impact on business. Similarly, we can spend more in the economy. This will encourage demand. This also has impact on the businesses. So, let us look at some of the important numbers before we move ahead. I have already analyzed these numbers in great detail in my previous videos on the economic survey. I would encourage you to watch out for those videos, particularly for the state of the economy. There I have discussed all such data in detail. But in order to keep this video complete, I will very briefly touch upon certain important data. So before the budget survey comes, before introducing the budget, we talk about the data that we have collected for the ongoing year. And this is what I am going to discuss very briefly. First of all, what is the environment for the Indian economy at present? At present, we see India's growth rate is among the fastest in the world. Is the fastest in the world, in fact. We have grown at 8.3%. Okay, and our recovery is so fast that it is exactly a definition of the V-shaped recovery. You can see a proper V here. This is what we call V-shaped recovery. So Indian economy has made V-shaped recovery and it is already above its 2019 levels, the pre-pandemic levels. So that means we have come out of the pandemic successfully in terms of our economy. So this is a good thing for us. That means from going here into future, unless God forbid there are more dangerous waves of COVID or some other problem, we can expect some stability in our numbers. For past 2 years, our fiscal deficits have reached a very high number. Our debt has reached a very high number. So these things we can address now finally. So this gives us more room to opt for fiscal consolidation. Similarly, when we look at both industry and the services, there is a good trend here. See, this is a PMI. Okay. In PMI, anything above 50 shows the expansion. This is the 50 line, the red line. That means the sector is expanding, its size is expanding. So here we can see expansion, except for a brief period here, and again here we can see that almost throughout there has been expansion of the manufacturing sector. Means manufacturing sector is expanding. More production units are opening and more production is happening there. So this purely measures an expansion in the sector. This is a very good way to look at a sector. Compared to manufacturing, the services decline more drastically and more faster. You see similar trend. Okay, similar fall here. Okay, this is around April 20, this is also around April 20, and then we see a recovery and then we see a decline again, and similarly here also. So we can clearly see the impact of the first COVID wave, the second COVID wave, the Delta variant in both the aspects. Services had a greater fall, but still, since the last Delta outbreak, services is also continuously increasing and industry is also increasing. So there is a good trend here that our industry is also reviving and expanding, and services is also recovering from the bottom of the crisis it had due to the COVID. And then we look at the stability. Again, from April 2020, when we had the first and the longest full-fledged lockdown, the unemployment rate has also gone down officially. This is the official unemployment rate, and this is the pan-India combined urban-rural number. So unemployment was at its peak in April 2020. Since then, it has continuously remained below 10%. Okay. The unemployment has continuously remained below 10%. And again, we see the impact of Delta variant. When Delta variant came, again unemployment increased a bit. And since then, again, it is below 10%. So unemployment levels have come down. 10% is not a very healthy or a good level. But still, when we see these peak levels, then we see it is much better than that. In India, on average, we see 7 to 8% unemployment. It is not a good number. Again, I'm saying I'm not trying to normalize unemployment, but whatever the average was, we are still there. We need to do something about it, but there is no worrying trend that it has overly increased. And another thing is here, the wholesale and the retail inflation. While retail inflation is under control largely and it is within the tolerance band, this is our tolerance band, 2 to 6%. Okay, 2 to 6% as it is written here, the tolerance band. And if we see, the inflation is largely within these numbers. So retail inflation is under control, but because of global supply chain disruption, the wholesale inflation is very high. This is a cause of concern. But this is largely due to global factors. There is not much we can do about it. So this is the status regarding the stability. Deficit numbers we will look into the budget itself. That's why we have not discussed here. Now, so far I have discussed the conditions of the economy. Now I will discuss the budgetary numbers themselves. Okay, this is the breakup of the revenue. From where the money is coming into the economy. So as you can see here, the tax revenue is 58% of our total earning or total revenue. And 35% comes from the borrowing, whereas roughly 7% comes from other sources. So the share of borrowing is very high in India, it should come down. But still, if we see and compare it with last 3 years, then the share of tax revenue has increased. And this is a good sign for us. The share of tax revenue has finally increased in 2021-22 when we compare it to the previous 2 years. And I will give you comparative data also. Please wait, it will come in the coming slides. The breakup is also provided. The biggest contributor today, apart from borrowing, is GST. 16% of the revenue has come from GST. Okay, and almost very close to GST is income tax and corporation tax, which have both given 15% contribution. Then excise duty at 7% and custom duty at 5%. Non-tax revenue is 5%. What is non-tax revenue? The revenue from the fee and fines, revenue from user charges, revenue from PSUs, etc. So that is non-tax revenue. Government has various products that it sells. Government has investments in number of companies. From that also government has an income. That is all non-tax revenue. And then there is a heading called non-debt capital receipts. Non-debt capital receipts contribution to the overall revenue is very less. And this money comes from the sale of our public sector units. So it should come low. We do not want this number to increase actually. We do not want this number also to increase. We want our tax revenue and non-tax revenue to increase in numbers. At present, they are combined at 63%. This is our revenues. Okay, and 37% is our capital account revenues. Okay, these are our revenue account receipts, 63%, and capital account receipts at 37%. Again, as I've said earlier also, you do not have to remember the numbers. So I will give you trend also, and from last page, just remember 2 numbers more, just that much. That almost 2/3 of our revenue is coming from, 2/3 of our revenue is coming from the taxes and the non-taxes, and 1/3 revenue, 35%, we would roughly say 1/3 of our revenue is coming from borrowing. You can't even call it a revenue, okay? But the way we prepare our budget, we record it under revenue, so we have to talk about it. Then let us look at the breakup of our expenditure. Let us look at it. the interest payments of our total spending has increased or is around 20%. For past 2 years, because of COVID, we had to borrow a lot, and as a result, the interest payments have increased. I will analyze all these numbers in further detail because these numbers and these trends will be analyzed in the coming slides as well. So right now I'm giving you overview from where money is coming and where it is going. Okay, so when we look at the numbers here, 20% goes to interest, 17% goes to states. The tax that we collected also contain the tax on behalf of states. So there are so many taxes which are collected by centers but then are shared with the states. So that is why center gives states their share. And this is different from transfers. The transfers that are required as per the Finance Commission mandate are separate. They are also 10%. Okay, so 20% interest payment, 17% tax share of the states, and 10% of the Finance Commission transfer. This money doesn't even come to you. This money goes immediately away from your hand. So of all our expenditure, if you look at it, then almost 50% of it, 20, 10 and 17, almost 50% of it is never spent by the central government. It is just given back. Okay. Then 15% is on central sector schemes. I will talk about what is central sector scheme. I have a separate slide for that. So I will go in detail for what is central sector scheme and what is CSS, center sponsored scheme. So the schemes together, they account for almost a quarter of our expenditure, 24%. And then out of the remaining, which is little more than a quarter, 8% goes to subsidy, 8% goes to defense, 4% to pension and 9% to other expenditures. So that is how we spend. Okay, so what is very interesting thing to note from here? An interesting thing to note from here is that only the 15 plus 9 plus 8 plus this much. This is what central government is actually spending. Rest is automatically decided even before budget is prepared. Okay, this much is not your choice. You do not have a choice regarding this expenditure. If you have taken a loan in past, you have to pay interest. This is not your choice. You have collected taxes on someone else's behalf, you have to pay it. There is no choice. Finance Commission decide you have to give this much money to states, you have to pay. There is no choice. How much money is there where center has a real choice? Pension, you have to give it. You have your own employees, you have to give pension to them. You can't deny that. The defense expenditure is almost fixed. Okay, defense procurement, you have some choice, but defense maintenance, the staff salaries, pension, etc., they are all fixed. So most of the expenditure of our government is already decided even before the preparation of budget. All of this is called committed expenditure. And the share of committed expenditure in India is very, very high. As we see here, almost 60% to 65% of our total expenditure is pre-decided. It is committed. You do not have any flexibility or any choice. And this decreases your ability to make a meaningful policy. So very interesting thing to note from breakup of expenditure is how much is committed expenditure and how much is the other expenditure. The committed expenditure is above 60% here. Okay, the pensions, they come in committed expenditure, interest payment, the state share, the Finance Commission transfer, okay, some of the subsidies such as food subsidy, etc., fertilizer subsidy, you have to pay it. You do not really have much of choice in many cases. Even some of the money in schemes, you have to pay. And then there are so many government employees, their salary, which is right now in other expenditures, that is also there. So almost 2/3 of our total expenditure is pre-decided. You can't do anything about it. So when we look at income, 2/3 come from renewable sources, 1/3 comes from a non-renewable or a source which is problematic, that is borrowing. So this pattern you can remember. How much is my committed expenditure where I do not have choice? That data you can identify. आपको ये याद नहीं रखना है कि इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट या ये सब कितना है, इस पे कभी क्वेश्चन नहीं आएगा, लेकिन आप इसके बेसिस पे इसके बारे में तो बात कर सकते हैं ना कि जब गवर्नमेंट एक बजट बनाती है तो उसके ऊपर कितनी तरह के रिस्ट्रिक्शंस हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल क्वेश्चन कम्स ऑन हेल्थ एंड एजुकेशन एक्सपेंडिचर. When you are talking about it, you have to talk about the constraint for the government as well, because 2/3 of our expenditure, 60-65% is pre-decided even before you prepare the budget. You have flexibility in only small part, and even among that small part there are many expenditures you have to engage. Okay, so there is very little room for maneuvering with the government. This is your key point to take home from this page. This is a more detailed expenditure analysis. This is the share of different expenditure in our total expenditure. So interest, the share of interest has increased by 2.26 points. Okay, the interest expenditure has increased because our borrowings have increased. पिछले 2 साल में कोविड की वजह से और दूसरी प्रॉब्लम्स की वजह से हमने ज़्यादा लोन लिए हैं, हमारी टैक्स कलेक्शन कम हुई है, और उस वजह से जो अब हमें इंटरेस्ट पे करना पड़ रहा है वो ज़्यादा है, क्योंकि ज़्यादा लोन लेंगे तो कल ज़्यादा ब्याज भी देना होगा, अगले दिन ज़्यादा इंटरेस्ट भी पे करना होगा. एंड टू द स्टूडेंट्स हु आर नॉट एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड दीज फ्यू लाइन्स, प्लीज डू नॉट वरी, आई एम रिपीटिंग एवरीथिंग. Okay, but here and there a few lines I am using in Hindi. Lot of students have requested for that, and I hope I am able to provide some of the details in more colloquial sense, in more easy sense, without breaking the flow for the other students. Okay, so for other students who can't understand Hindi, you do not have to worry about anything. There is nothing which I have said specifically in Hindi. Everything that is there I'm repeating in English as well. So you are not missing out on anything. But some Hindi students also watch English videos because they found them to be better quality, or they found them to be more informative, and they want to also see what other students are looking at. So lot of requests are received. So please, a few lines if you can say, and a few things you can simplify in the colloquial sense. So interest, the share of interest has increased in our budget. Defense, its share has not changed. Transport, small increase but roughly the same. We are looking for which area has changed in our budget. This is the trend analysis that I was talking about. So trends जब हम देख रहे हैं तो उसमें देख रहे हैं इंटरेस्ट में हमारा एक्सपेंडिचर काफ़ी बढ़ा है. Then transfer to the states have also increased. At the same time, our tax administration expenditure has gone down. This is a good thing. That means we are becoming more efficient there. Although not a big decrease, but still a significant decrease given the taxes are also rising. Agriculture allied activities roughly the same. 0.08 is no change actually, roughly the same. So another sector which we always try to look into is education. 1,04,278 crore. This is little more than 2.6% of our budgetary expenditure. So 2.6% of our budgetary expenditure is on education, and this has increased slightly. Okay, its share has increased by almost 0.31%. And when we compare it to the education budget last year, there is an increase of almost 20%. Whereas health is almost unchanged at 86,606 crore. So this is almost 2.2% of our total expenditure. So together, education and health are roughly 5% of our expenditure. This is less and it should be more, but as I have analyzed on the previous page, that our expenditure to a large extent is committed expenditure. We have little room for maneuvering, and hence it becomes difficult for us at times. Okay. Food subsidy expenditure has decreased because food subsidy expenditure was very high during the last 2 years, because government launched specific welfare programs for people as there was large scale migration as well as there was COVID. So because of that our welfare expenditure increased, which is now getting cut down a bit. Okay. And similarly, almost everywhere else, roughly, it's the same trend. So major change that we see here is in the form of interest. The expenditure on interest has increased significantly. Okay. IT and telecom expenditure has increased. This is largely due to the money given to BSNL. BSNL is running into very big losses and lot of money is infused into BSNL to cover up its losses. That is why this expenditure is more, and perhaps that money could have gone into our education. That money could have gone into our health. So such emergencies also come from time to time. And if government tomorrow will sell BSNL, then there will be allegations and there will be counter allegation. It will become political issue. But you can see here what the sick PSUs can do to our budgeting. I will analyze it more because I have mentioned about it specifically in our coming slides. Yes, I said I will talk about the CSS, the center sponsored scheme, as well as the sector schemes. So, first of all, if you check out the description of this video, you can find a download link for these slides. So you can download the slides, you can check out all these data in detail, you can read them and analyze them yourself, and you can read about all of this. So I will not read this entirely, but I will give you a broader idea. Please download the slides and make use of them. Also, I would request you, if there is any doubt and if you want to interact, please leave your comments in the video. And I do check out the videos from time to time and I will reply definitely to your questions or any other comments. Yes. So center sector scheme are the schemes specifically linked to the subjects in the union list. These are carried out by center itself. The money is not given to the states in order to implement. These schemes are implemented by center itself. Whereas CSS is linked to the subjects which come under the state list or the concurrent list. Okay, these center do not directly spend, but these are implemented by states and money is provided by the center. Center do monitors them, center do follow up with these states. And another difference here is in the center sector scheme, the money is contributed only by center, which is logical because center is doing it and center, there is no spending by the states. Whereas in the CSS, there is some contribution by the states. Usually there is some contribution. The contribution can vary. For example, in certain schemes, it can be 50-50. In some schemes, it can be as low as 90-10. For example, MNREGS, it was 90-10, states 10%, center 90%. And then the examples of both type of schemes. So under CSS, the MNREGS, okay. Under center sector scheme, you have, for example, Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana, Ujjwala Yojana, Namami Gange, BharatNet, and there are so many in fact. These are all example of the center sector scheme. Clear? So this is the difference between center sector and center sponsor. Now more trends into expenditure. So I have given you certain analysis here. First of all, a lot of expenditure is committed. Then in what aspects we are spending in different areas, which areas expenditure has increased, what is the pattern and trend. And now let us look at the trend in the expenditure broadly. So a good thing here that you can notice is that our capital expenditure has increased significantly. Okay. The capital expenditure has increased by 24.5%, by almost a quarter compared to last year. And the capital expenditure is basically spent on infrastructure, education, health. And since we have seen education, health have not increased that much, so a lot of it is actually spent on infrastructure here. And I will discuss more on infrastructure also, in what sense are we spending it. But this is a very good sign. The revenue expenditure is almost intact, the same as last year. Okay, very slight increase, very slight, 0.9%. You can't even identify this. So this is another good trend that we need to identify. This is our revenue expenditure trend. If you look at last 4 years, then revenue expenditure has not changed a lot. Revenue expenditure was this much in 2021 itself. In 2021, we planned it to be less. हमने सोचा था हम कम स्पेंड करेंगे, बट अल्टीमेटली हमने ज़्यादा किया. सो तीनों साल का एक्सपेंडिचर एक्चुअली बराबर है. ये हमारा प्लान एक्सपेंडिचर था लास्ट ईयर का, जो कि हुआ नहीं. सो दिस नंबर इज एक्चुअली नॉट इवन प्रेजेंट. दिस इज बजटरी एस्टिमेट. This is also budgetary estimate. Last year we will know how much we have actually spent. So last year क्या हुआ? What happened last year was that we expected less revenue. हमने सोचा था टैक्सेस कम आएंगे. हमने एक्सपेंडिचर भी इसलिए थोड़ा कम प्लान किया था. बट by the mid-year we realized that tax collection is very good. The GST itself is giving us a very good scope. So क्योंकि हमारा रेवेन्यू कलेक्शन काफ़ी बेटर हुआ हमारी एक्सपेक्टेशन से, बिकॉज जीएसटी में हमें काफ़ी टैक्स मिला, हमने अपना एक्सपेंडिचर बढ़ा दिया, पर्टिकुलरली ऑन इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर एंड सर्टेन अदर एस्पेक्ट्स. ओके, एंड देन वी इंक्रीज एक्सपेंडिचर इन द स्कीम्स ऑल्सो. सो वो हमें यहाँ दिख रहा है. This was planned, but this happened. And previous year is this much. So last 2 year expenditure is roughly the same, and this year also we plan a similar expenditure. So not much of a change in revenue expenditure, but you see capital expenditure. This is what we planned. This is what happened in 2020-21. Last year we planned this much, but we actually happened to spend this much, as more taxes were collected. And similarly, this year we plan to spend this much. So this is a very, very good sign. And this is where you can talk about a long-term trend, that this budget is future oriented. This budget is oriented at growth and development. So this tells us about the orientation of the budget. So this kind of analysis you actually require. कि पैसा कहाँ खर्च हुआ, किस किस एरिया में खर्च हुआ, फिर उसके ब्रॉडर ट्रेंड्स क्या हैं. नंबर्स नहीं याद रखना है. ये नहीं याद रखना है कि ये 3,194,663 करोड़ है. यू डो नॉट हैव टू रिमेंबर ऑल ऑफ दिस नंबर्स. यू जस्ट हैव टू लुक एट दिस काइंड ऑफ ट्रेंड कि ये क्या बढ़ रहा है, व्हाट इज इंक्रीजिंग एंड व्हाट इज डिक्रीजिंग. बस इतना लिख दीजिए. दैट इज मोर देन इनफ समटाइम्स. नाउ लेट अस लुक एट द trends towards our receipts. Yes, our taxes in 2020-21 were this much. Okay, rest was borrowing. So हम देख सकते हैं 2020-21 में the share of taxes and non-taxes was less than the borrowing. मतलब जो अभी मैंने आपको बताया कि टैक्सेस और नॉन टैक्सेस का शेयर 63% है, that was less than 50%, much less than that in 2020-21. So there also we are making a big improvement. That is how you check the trend. This is borrowing. The borrowing is falling. Okay, this reflects my borrowing, capital receipts. Borrowing plus disinvestment. So this number has fallen from this to this, and next year we expect it to be this much. Meanwhile, the collection from taxes have increased from this to this. This is what we expected. हमें लगा था इतना टैक्स मिलेगा, बट इतना मिला. Next year we expect our taxes to be this much. So next year we expect the contribution of taxes will be even more than what it is this year. So this year it is 63%. This is 37%. Next year, perhaps it will be 66% and this is 33%. So something like this. Clear? So total receipts. There is increase of 4.8% in our receipts. And the tax revenue, this year we expect it to increase by 9. The ongoing year, we expect that by the end of year, the revenues are more than 9.6% from 2021-22. Okay. Meanwhile, the GDP growth, it is all nominal number here, is around 11%. So if we look at the tax to GDP ratio, this is not increasing. The tax collection have increased. These are our tax collection. These have increased. But still our tax to GDP ratio is not rising because GDP is rising even further. GDP is rising at this number. This is a nominal GDP and nominal or broader tax revenue number is rising by this much. So it is still less than the GDP. And why taxes are not increasing more than GDP? Because we have decreased our excise duty. We have decreased excise duty by 15% in order to give more incentive for the production. So again, this is a hint towards our fiscal policy that we are giving incentives in order to encourage production. That is particularly aimed at manufacturing because just give me 1 second here please. Excise duty is because the excise duty is on manufacturing and other industries. Similarly, the non-tax revenue is lower and the non-debt capital receipt is also lower. So meanwhile, tax revenue has increased, but the non-tax revenues and the non-debt capital receipt has also increased. Non-debt capital इसलिए कम हुई है कि इस साल जो हमने PSUs बेची हैं उनका numbers कम है. In the years earlier, we were selling more shares in our PSUs. This year, we didn't had to sell as much because our tax revenues improved. So this was also an important thing. This is a good thing. Okay. The non-tax revenue has decreased. That is because less people are traveling, less people are consuming different things. So automatically non-tax revenue gets down because of that. Non-tax revenue, for example, includes the earning from railways, etc. also. So that has impact from lockdown and other aspects also. Now, what are the major fiscal policy points that we can see in the budget? Just okay. The major fiscal policy aspects. So another good thing was the government did not have to rely on National Small Savings Fund. Government can rely upon number of borrowings. I've already told you. Okay, there is government bond which we call dated securities. In addition, we also have the treasury bills, etc. But this year, we did not have to rely upon the third source, which is small savings. We didn't have to rely upon it. Okay, this money is kept in the public account of India and we did not have to rely upon it. Then another point about fiscal management. What we are looking in our expenditure is also increased or affected by these numbers. The Air India had lot of loans, and when Air India had to be sold, government had to settle those loans, without which government could not sell the Air India. So in order to cover up the losses of Air India or the loans of Air India, government provided 51,000 crore rupees in our budget towards the Air India settlement. And then another 44,000 crore rupees have been given for capital infusion in BSNL. So much amount is just getting wasted because of the sick PSUs. Again, this amount is almost close to 2.2, or in fact more, 2.4% of our GDP. And this money, if could have been spent on education, health, would have done wonders for our economy. This is what sick PSUs can do for you. Yet there are people who always advocate for PSUs, yet there are people who always argue that PSUs should not be sold. Frankly, I'm not saying that we should sell our assets, but if those assets are significantly loss making, if no government in power has been able to revive them for last 20 years, then you can't do anything. Okay? And they are a burden on the economy. You can see how they are a burden on the economy here. Nonetheless, the estimated fiscal deficit is 6.4% of the GDP. Next year, we expect the fiscal deficit will be slightly brought down. Okay. Last year, it was 9.2%. This year, it is around or likely to be around 6.9%. Now, there is only one more month towards the end of this year, so we can say there is not going to be much of difference here. So it has come down from previous year and it is going to go down further. And in our statement for the long term, the target is set at 4.5% by 2025. 2025. Okay, so every year you will see is similar kind of decrease targeted, roughly 0.5%, 0.6%, and that is how we will decrease it in the next 3-4 years. So fiscal deficit is targeted to decrease, and similarly the revenue and the primary deficit also. The revenue deficit has also declined, but this revenue deficit is still very high. This year we provision it to be 3.8%. And another thing that you can see here is good, which is good here, that last year, or in fact the ongoing year, the bulk of our deficit was because of the revenue account. मतलब हमारे regular expenses भी pay नहीं हो पा रहे थे. We were not able to pay even our regular expenses to a large extent. You can see 2/3 of the total expenditure here, or more than that, is because of the revenue deficit. Whereas here, this is less than 60%. That means more and more money from the borrowing is now going towards capital account. This is another good thing. That is how you can analyze data also. As a proportion, if you see revenue deficit, okay, if revenue deficit to fiscal deficit ratio, this is falling. This shows that we are spending more on capital. More of the borrowing is going towards investment. This is a good thing always. And similar kind of decrease can also be observed in the primary deficit. So we can see some of the important developments here, that this year, while the fiscal deficit will not decrease much, the revenue deficit is decreasing significantly. The 2 years of sustained loans, the 2 years of losses and very high amount of borrowings that we had has pushed us to a very high level of debt. For example, our debt in 2016 was around 46%. The central government's debt to the GDP ratio was 46%. And today it has increased to 61%. Okay, this is roughly the same level that we had somewhere in 2003. So we made a lot of improvement, a 15% improvement from 2003 to 2016. But because of the last 2 years, we have lost the covered ground. Now we have to further decrease it in the coming time. Next year we expect the debt to GDP ratio to fall marginally. Okay, at least it will start falling. It has now plateaued again. And the interest payments as a percentage of revenue receipts, that has increased from 36 to 42%. And as a proportion of our total expenditure, as we've seen earlier, it has increased by almost 2.2%. I've shared data with you today earlier, so not able to recall, please rewind the video and see again. So the interest payments will continue to increase to 43% next year as a portion of the revenue deficit, because we've taken so many loans recently. So interest burden on us presently is high. As we will pay our old loans and take less loan in future, these numbers will go down again. This interest payment is always in proportion to the debt to GDP ratio. Since debt numbers have increased, the interest payments have also increased. Next year, when we expect the debt to decrease, after that only in the next to next year, we expect interest to fall down. So our debt affects our interest payments, and our interest payment affects our ability to spend. You can see here almost 22% of the money is blocked. We can't use this money. This much money is required just to pay old loans, interest for the old loans only, not the debt settlement. Okay. And some of the other important developments in the fiscal policy. That this year in the budget we have removed the exceptions in the custom duty on almost 300 products. And this is done in order to simplify the system. This is done in order to improve our custom duty collection and to promote the domestic products. Then tax incentives for the startups have been extended by another year. They had to expire this year, but we've extended them by another year because our startups are doing well and these incentives have worked well for us. The number of unicorn startups, and not just unicorn, other startups, the overall startup ecosystem has got a lot of boost, and this is working well for us to some extent. Okay. Similarly, in the cooperatives, the tax has been decreased. Okay, this is for the cooperatives whose revenue is up to 10 crore rupees. And then the subsidies are also significantly reduced to achieve a limited fiscal consolidation. So these are some of the broader trends. Let us look at the next slides now. These are the major tax proposals. No changes in the income tax. Okay. Similarly, the surcharge long-term capital gains tax is capped at 15%. Okay, not very important for us, frankly. This is not very important for us. Tax on virtual digital assets, this is introduced because a lot more people are now putting their money into the virtual assets such as bitcoins and other digital currencies. So that is the reason. So finally we had to introduce taxes on it. Updating the return of income, that is a good system that government has started. Now even after filing your tax return, you can go back to it and revise. For example, I did something this year. For that I receive a payment little later. Then I can go back and revise my old statement and show some of the later received income in my previous tax filings. That way I can first of all come clean on the tax system, plus let us say my income last year was around 6 lakh rupees. This year my income is 10 lakh rupees. In addition, I have also received 2 lakh rupees extra for my last year work. For example, there is delayed payment. So I can go back and revise my old income tax file and I can show that last year my income was actually 8 lakh rupees. I received 2 lakh rupees a little later. That way I will have less tax payments to pay. And this is specifically aimed at people who for certain reason wants to come clean later on. So that is there. Then I've already mentioned the points of cooperatives. Okay. So alternate minimum tax is reduced on them from 18.5 to 15%. This is done because this was already done for the corporations. It was not done for the cooperatives. So now it is done for them also. And similarly, surcharge is also reduced from 12 to 7%, where income is between 1 to 10 crore rupees. I've also mentioned the point about startups. These are also extended by another year. And on a lot of items, the custom duties have been changed. The custom exemptions have been phased out. In fact, these are 500 items. If I mentioned something else, I'm sorry. These are 500 items. And the major policies, the new policies in the budget. So here, the Reserve Bank of India is amended so that RBI can issue a digital currency. और मैं आपको एक और बात और बता देता हूँ. This digital currency is right now only in plan. Until RBI issues this digital currency, until there is a lot of data or information in public domain, examination question will not come. UPSC is not going to ask you question on the basis of a half-baked idea. Okay, we have mentioned it in budget, but let it come. अभी परेशान मत होइए कि डिजिटल करेंसी के बारे में पढ़ना है. RBI को करने दीजिए. Let there be. Do not worry. एग्जाम में कभी क्वेश्चन इस तरह से नहीं आते हैं. UPSC always takes care of this. That whatever they are asking, students at least have information on that. There is already adequate information. Something may be in news, but until a consensus on that is reached, unless government has already taken its final steps, it is not asked in our examination. So just because it is mentioned in budget, I see so many students asking me questions in my lectures on digital currency, and I'm only telling them, see, digital currency, we do not know what exactly is RBI going to issue. What would be its nature? What would be the provisions? How it is going to affect? Let it be there. तब पढ़ लेना. अभी क्यों पढ़ना है? क्या जल्दी है? एग्जाम में तब तक नहीं आएगा जब तक इस पे कुछ कंक्रीट हमें नहीं पता होगा. सो डू नॉट वरी अबाउट इट एज ऑफ नाउ, प्लीज. ओके. देन द लेजिस्लेटिव प्रपोजल दैट स्पेशल इकोनॉमिक जोन legislation will be replaced by new legislation, and that will enable states to become partners in the development of enterprise and services hub, and this will include all existing and new industrial enclaves, and this will also promote agro and private forestry. Okay, and this will also there will be amendments to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code to include and facilitate cross-border insolvency resolution. So this is self-explanatory. I do not have to explain this aspect. So these are two new bills or amendments that we are going to make, and we have announced them in the budget. Similarly, the emergency credit line guarantee scheme is now extended up to March 2023. Again, this is a big incentive for our industry, MSME, and this is done so that we can have more investments and there can be more growth. Again, this is an important cue to our fiscal policy, that it is, we are still using a lot of tax incentives to encourage investments and growth. We have seen few on the previous page, we can see few here. Then certain announcements in the health and nutrition. Under Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, there will be platform for national digital health ecosystem. So over there you can go and register on this health ecosystem. You will get a unique identity. You can register for the health facilities and you can book the treatments and other health services. Similarly, important initiative for mental health program, and we have seen that post-COVID or even during COVID, a lot of people have faced stress. Some people faced stress because of financial issues. Many people, their finances are very badly disturbed. They are dependent upon their old savings. For many people, old savings are also getting wiped out. So obviously, many people have become very stressed. And so many people are not just stressed because of financial constraint, they are stressed because they are depressed, because they can't meet people, can't go out. They were workaholic, they used to work a lot, and now without work, they're not feeling very well, they're not feeling normal. So a lot of people had mental health issues. And recognizing this, we have understood that right now this is done a lot by private sector. Many private initiatives have been there to open consultant helplines. Government also had, but now we are doing it in a big way in order to help people. Okay, so we want to improve the quality of mental health counseling. For example, depression. There has been lot of new articles and lot of discussion now on depression, because so many people didn't used to treat depression as a problem. So many people used to make fun, and there is very little sensitiveness towards this very important issue. So this is a good step, and we are doing it. And then a digital ecosystem for registration of the laborers for skilling and livelihood. So this will also be there. Now, as I have been saying, infrastructure is one of the most important push in this budget. So let us see what is happening in infrastructure. This is also one of the area where we are spending a lot. So in the infrastructure sector, it is the PM Gati Shakti, which is one of the core new idea or the core pillar. It was introduced last year, and it is largely aimed at infrastructure to speed up our movement of goods and services. And for that, we need to spend more on road, railway, multimodal, inland water transport, or the domestic internal water transport, the sea transport for our domestic transport, okay, domestic usage, and similarly the air transport, ports for international shippings, etc. So all of that comes under it. The objective is to integrate all of this. Right now we have seen that different ministries and different departments are taking so many decisions, and although the cohesion between them is much better than earlier. Excuse me just for 1 minute, please. Yes, the cohesion between different ministries and the departments, it is better than what it used to be earlier. But there is still some gap, but there is still some lack of coordination. So in order to improve that, we have initiated the PM Gati Shakti framework, where we are integrating the decision making and data collation on different transport aspects. And particularly in the budget, we have provisioned for 25,000 kilometers of additional national highways. Okay. And similarly, we are also going to use the railways specifically for the logistics, and there will be development in that. So 100 cargo terminals for multimodal logistics facilities, specifically for the tackling of containers. So we will develop certain train depots where large cranes can shift the containers from train racks to the big trucks. Right now, these kind of facilities are limited. So 100 more cargo terminals which will be developed in the next 3 years. We have provided some budget for that. Similarly, one station, one product concept. So there are certain areas which are known for specific products. Okay, so different regions have their own speciality. For example, there are different spices which come from different region of India. Let us say Guntur is known for its very special red chili. Unjha is known for its certain spices. Okay, and likewise Kerala is known for certain spices. Different regions in India have different products, and not just spices. There are so many other products as well. Okay, so for example, Panipat is known for handloom products. So there are different clusters in different regions, and those regions are known for certain specific products as well. So we want to create more of cluster, that on this station, one product concept, that this station is particularly developed. Other products will also be transported, but if there is any special care, something specially required for particular product which is famous here, then we will develop infrastructure for that. So this will be our approach. Okay, this will help the local businesses in the supply chain. And then there will be 400 the Vande Bharat trains. This will increase the average speed of trains significantly. So that is also good. Then there will be 5G auction and the 5G infrastructure development, which is linked to the PLI. That is the, and then a battery swapping policy for the electric vehicles and many other proposals here. So these are the kind of things that you can read further from the slides as they are available for the download. The river interlinking, for example, the Kane-Betwa link, which is already going on, will continue to be implemented, and there is 44,605 crore rupees provision here. Again, you do not have to remember these numbers. You just have to remember that government is working and money is provisioned for Kane-Betwa, means work on it is going on. And then there will be 5 more river linking projects which are at different stage of implementation. Okay, so this is additional detail about the PM Gati Shakti. Okay, so infrastructure schemes will be cooperated from different ministries. Okay, so already we have Bharat Mala, Sagar Mala, schemes for inland waterways, dry and land ports, Udan, etc. We are going to link them. This is done specifically for cohesion between them. And it will not only link the different transport sectors, it will also link it with the clusters. So business clusters plus transportation, together we will create an integrated approach, and we will also take help of the satellite data here. So PM Gati Shakti is based upon the 6 broader pillars: comprehensive, sector whole. We will not have policy which is not going to look at the broader picture. We will always look at the broader picture. For example, we are developing a port. This port itself will not do your job, because that will become congested. If I increase the capacity of port by 3 times, then I need to increase the capacity of road also by more than that, so that all the additional cargo that is coming out from the port is very quickly coming out of it, and additional cargo can be supplied to it very quickly. The higher capacity port should not become a choking point. It should become a facilitator. Okay, likewise, there should be expansion of the railway lines, there should be expansion of the road network, communication network, all kind of facilities should come together. That is why there should be interlinking between different aspects. So it will be comprehensive on the basis of priority, what is more needed. Okay, optimization. Optimization is the most effective and efficient way. Synchronization, we understand what is synchronization, that everyone is informed. So basically we want to link and integrate different transport departments. We come to now an important aspect of our budget, that is subsidy. The share of subsidies have decreased drastically in our expenditure actually. At one point of time, somewhere around 2015, the share of subsidy was close to 12%. And little more than that, a little ago, it was 16% of our expenditure. So the budget on subsidy, or the expenditure on subsidy has almost been decreased by half. Government has wiped out the petrol diesel subsidies. Government has also wiped out the LPG subsidy to a large extent. So subsidies have decreased. This year also we see a decrease in subsidy. Let us look at some of the major subsidy. So if we look at the total expenditure on subsidy, there is decrease of 27%, a very big decrease. First of all, the food subsidy. The food subsidy, you can see here, it is almost 60% of the total subsidy. It is more than 2 lakh crore rupees out of 3,50,000 crore. Okay, so it is almost 60, a little more than that. So there is decrease in the food subsidy in the similar proportion to the total expenditure. See, in 2021, the food subsidy was much more, as there was long lockdown and there was migration of laborers. So there was much higher level of food subsidy that was budgeted. So Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana, and impact of the COVID-19 on poor people, and there were also loans for Food Corporation of India that were cleared. That also was a additional impact on the subsidy. So we can see here the food subsidy. In 2020-21, we spent 5,41,000. Okay. This year we spent 2,86,000. Next year we plan to decrease it to almost 2,06,000. So in 2020-21 it was very, very high. This year it is almost half of that. Next year will be further 27% less. So we can see how much food subsidy has decreased. And there was a similar increase also from 2019 onwards. From 2019-20, the number was very close to this. So it increased, then reached high, then come down, then finally settling around its original value. Fertilizer subsidy is also decreasing. Okay. The fertilizer subsidy this year was high because the international fertilizer prices increased suddenly, and we had to provide more subsidies in order to supply DAP and urea at a subsidized cost. There was also shortage of DAP and urea in the market as well, and this was again because of the international shortages. So this year we expect the international prices to moderate. As a result, we have provisioned for less subsidy in fertilizer. Last year we provisioned even less. You can see here, we provisioned only 79,000 crore rupees. But ultimately we had to spend almost double. This year prices will moderate, but not that much. Petroleum subsidy has decreased to some extent, is likely to decrease to some extent. It is already significantly less than what it is used to be. And other subsidies are also going to decrease. As a result, a big decrease in subsidies we see here. Clear? So all of this analysis is also given in detail. Please read the slides. I'm always telling you, download the slides, read them. These are provided. Additional details are given for you. Clear? And now we have the social spending. We've analyzed a lot of aspects. We've analyzed how budget is introducing tax proposals to encourage the growth, how we are cutting the subsidy, how we are cutting some of the expenditures in order to achieve some fiscal consolidation. Okay, we are still managing some of the, despite additional tax cuts, despite tax incentives, we are still able to control the fiscal deficit because it was already very, very high. You cannot go up from a certain level. And we have cut our subsidies also to large extent in the coming year. I mean, we have provisioned for less budget. And likewise, we have seen how different sources have contributed to our revenues, where we are going to spend, and we have looked into different aspects of budget making and the fiscal policy. Then towards the end, we must also look at what budget talks about the social sectors. So here, the health budget, I've already discussed it earlier, it is around 86,200 crore rupees. Our total expenditure is 39 lakh crore. This would be almost 2.2% of that. Okay, and this is 0.2% higher than the last year. Whereas education, the outlay is almost 20% higher than the last year. So if we look at these together, not much of the changes actually. This 20% higher is the numbers from the last year. Last year our spending on education was actually less. So this is not a big improvement. And their numbers together is still less than 5%, which is a very bad number for us. Together, we should be spending at least 8% of our total expenditure on education and health combined, at least 8%. Developed countries spend almost 20%. Developing country average is around 8%. India is spending even less than the other emerging markets. We are spending less than 5%. Then if we look at the welfare of women and children, then there is an increase of almost 7.1% in the next budget. Okay, and this amount is in fact more than our education and health spending, if you look at it. And similarly, the money spent for the welfare of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, that is likely to increase by 1.7 and 2%. Okay, roughly maintaining their level, not significant changes here. But the allocation towards northeast region is significant. Okay, so we are going to spend almost 11% higher on the northeast of India. So with this, we have analyzed different aspects of the budget, the financial aspects of the budget, the fiscal policy aspects of the budget, then the policy aspects of the budget, general policy that have been introduced, and finally we have also looked at some of the welfare aspects of the budget. And with this, we end our session. Thank you.